The night had settled over Fallbrook, California, with the kind of stillness that always makes people remember later that nothing felt wrong at all. The McStay home, a 2-story suburban house at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, looked peaceful from the outside. Soft light leaking through the curtains, toys scattered in the yard, and a half-finished fountain project in the backyard that Joseph had been working on for days. Anyone passing by that evening would have assumed everything inside the house was perfectly normal. 2 little boys asleep, a hard-working father tired from the day, a devoted mother moving around the kitchen, and the familiar hum of a family settling into the night. But behind that quiet, something unseen had already started shifting the course of their lives forever. The last confirmed trace of the family came on February 4th, 2010. Joseph, busy running his small fountain installation business, had spent the afternoon on a routine phone call with one of his employees. His tone was normal, casual, the kind of conversation that doesn't warn anyone of what's coming next. Summer, known for her protective and sometimes anxious nature, had sent a few text messages that also felt ordinary. The 2 boys, Gianni and Joseph Jr., had been bouncing around the living room earlier, leaving tiny footprints of joy that would soon become haunting reminders. Later that evening, the family's vehicle, a white Isuzu Trooper, left the driveway. The engine's soft rumble was the last real sound the neighborhood heard from the McStays. No one knows what the mood inside the car was. Were the boys sleeping in the back seat? Was Summer quiet? Was Joseph preoccupied, maybe thinking about work? Or was something else happening? Something forced, something terrifying. A journey had begun, but the destination was not the border-crossing security camera that would later flash their images across national headlines. Nor was it the vast desert where detectives would eventually uncover the truth buried beneath the soil. That night, the family simply vanished into the darkness, and the world would not hear their voices again. For days after, the house stayed eerily still. Joseph's mother tried calling, but got no answer. Summer's phone remained silent. The boys' laughter, usually echoing across the rooms, faded into mute, unsettling emptiness. When relatives visited the house, they found nothing that screamed danger. The dogs were left outside with food and water, but no one had come back to bring them in. A carton of eggs sat on the kitchen counter, as if someone had planned to cook and never finished. There were bowls on the table, drawers slightly open, and a strange sense that, whatever happened, it hadn't taken long. It was as if the family had been lifted out of their lives mid-moment. Detectives searched for signs of struggle, but found none. There was no broken glass, no blood, no forced entry. It was the kind of clean disappearance that can only happen when a family leaves willingly, or is made to leave without time to resist. And then, almost mockingly, a grainy security video surfaced. It appeared to show a family resembling the McStays walking into Mexico on foot through the San Ysidro border crossing. The footage became a national obsession. Were they running away? Did they decide to start over? Had they been abducted? Theories exploded everywhere. Kidnapping, cartel involvement, financial trouble, voluntary escape. Even investigators were split. But something was wrong. The couple had over $100,000 sitting untouched in their bank account. Summer hated crossing the border. Joseph had upcoming work contracts he was excited about. Nothing fit. Nothing explained why a thriving young family would abandon their home, their pets, their business, their relatives, and simply fade into a foreign country with 2 small children and no supplies. As the months passed, the mystery twisted into something darker. The McStay home remained untouched, a time capsule of a family that clearly had not been planning to start a new life. The business phone kept ringing with no response. Holidays came and went. The case grew cold. People whispered about foul play, about betrayal, about someone close to the family who might have known their routines, their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses. Someone who might have had access to the house, to their trust, to the moment they disappeared. And then, 4 years later, far from the calm streets of Fallbrook, in the dry, unforgiving desert of Victorville, California, beneath the dusty ground, searchers made a discovery that would turn the quiet mystery into a brutal horror story. A shallow grave, then another. Bones, fabric, a child's tiny remains. A family buried together in violence, ending the hope that they might still be alive somewhere. But the story of how they got there, who led them there, and why it happened, did not unfold overnight. It would unravel slowly, painfully, dragging hidden motives into the light and revealing just how dark the truth behind a seemingly normal life could be. When the shallow pit in the desert surrendered its first secret, investigators knew the quiet mystery they'd been circling for years had crossed into a new, darker territory. The sand was coarse, the air was dry, and everything around the site felt hollow, as if the earth itself had been holding its breath. Bones lay tangled together, small ones, fragile ones, and larger ones that told the story of grown bodies forced into the ground. Items of clothing, scraps of fabric, a rusted strap, all half devoured by time. In that moment, the desert was no longer just a landscape. It became a witness that had waited too long to speak. The news spread in a wave of grief. Joseph's mother broke down as detectives delivered the confirmation. Summer's relatives collapsed into disbelief. For 4 long years, they had prayed for a miracle, believed in the chance that maybe, somehow, the family had chosen a life far from their old home. But the desert's silence had turned into a scream that crushed every remaining hope. All 4 members of the McStay family, Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and little Joseph Jr., had been murdered, buried together like discarded remnants of a life that someone had tried to erase. As detectives widened their search around the burial site, one unsettling pattern emerged. Whoever had done this seemed to know the desert well. The graves were dug in a secluded area, far from main roads, the kind of place that only someone familiar with the terrain could navigate confidently. It wasn't random. It wasn't rushed. It was intentional. That detail forced investigators to revisit every single person connected to the McStay family, especially those who lived close to them, worked with them, or held grudges buried under politeness. Slowly, suspicion circled around one name, someone who had stepped into the McStay world not as an enemy, but as an insider. Someone who had been close to Joseph's business, who had access, who knew their routines, and who had everything to gain from Joseph's disappearance. Pieces of past disagreements resurfaced, arguments over money, business deals that tasted bitter, promises that didn't hold together behind professional smiles. A man who had once presented himself as a friend now appeared in a far more sinister light, his actions from years earlier gaining a darker meaning when viewed through the lens of the family's fate. There were clues left behind, scattered not just in the house, but in the way the family vanished. Their car was found near the border, abandoned awkwardly, as though someone had staged the scene to hint at a voluntary escape. The dogs were left with food, but no sign of preparation for a disappearance. Their accounts were untouched, their phones dead, their routines shattered in a way that didn't align with their personalities. Summer would never leave without telling someone she trusted. Joseph would never abandon contracts he'd already committed to completing. and the boys. No parent would willingly drag two small children across a border without a single belonging. The more detectives studied the puzzle, the more one truth became clear. None of it made sense unless the family had been forced. Back at the McStay home, investigators found traces that had gone unnoticed in earlier searches. Subtle marks, overlooked details, faint shadows of a struggle that didn't leave a bloody trail, but still whispered that something violent had occurred behind closed doors. It wasn't a chaotic crime. It was controlled. Whoever orchestrated it understood the family too well. They knew how to move silently, how to lead them out, how to create a scene that would confuse the public. It was a crime guided by calculation, not chaos. The timeline grew sharper. Investigators pieced together the hours before the family vanished with painful precision. The sudden silence of phones, the missing movements, the disappearance of digital records, and the eerie final image of their vehicle on the road. The further they dug, the more it became evident that this wasn't an act of passion. It was planned, practiced, cold. As they connected phone pings, bank activities, and witness statements, the circle of suspicion tightened. The man who once stood beside Joseph as a business partner had begun to reveal cracks in his own story. His explanations didn't match the evidence. His alibis shifted. His behavior in the days after the disappearance raised flags that now seemed impossible to ignore. While the world wondered where the McStay family had gone, he had moved with an unsettling calm. And when investigators compared tire tracks, communications, and subtle movements in the days before the disappearance, they found something chilling. Indicators that the killer had gone to the desert shortly after the family vanished. A trip that made no sense for any innocent reason. A trip that aligned almost perfectly with the burial timeline. But the desert was still whispering more secrets. As investigators knelt beside the remains, examining the fractures, the soil, the positioning of the bodies, they realized another horrifying truth. This crime wasn't just about the adults. The children had met the same brutal fate, with no mercy shown, no hesitation spared. Something dark had been hiding under the surface of a business partnership, something that had festered long enough to turn into an act of violence that wiped out an entire family. The truth was getting closer, but the final revelation, the one that would expose motive, opportunity, and betrayal, still waited to be unearthed in the final chapter of this horrifying case. The deeper investigators went into the final timeline of the McStay family's life, the clearer the picture became. This was not a disappearance born of chaos. It was the result of a decision someone had been planning long before the night the family vanished. And that someone had moved with a confidence that comes only from rehearsed intentions. The motive that had once been tangled in misunderstandings and missing information began to sharpen into something painfully simple. Money, resentment, and a cold willingness to eliminate anyone standing in the way. The man the investigators had been quietly circling around tried to hold his ground at first. He insisted he had nothing to do with the family's disappearance. He told stories of business disagreements that he claimed were exaggerated. He spoke about Joseph as though he cared deeply. But when detectives confronted him with the inconsistencies in his statements, his calm began to crack. Every interview brought new contradictions. Every explanation drew more suspicion. And as investigators followed his movements in the days after the family vanished, a chilling pattern unfolded, one that pointed directly to him. Phone records placed him near the McStay home at the exact time the family went dark. Financial documents revealed that he had been drowning in debt that he had been hiding under an image of confidence. Investigators uncovered conversations he had with others, moments where he hinted at frustration with Joseph, where he implied he was being treated unfairly, where jealousy simmered under polite smiles. And when they compared tire tracks near the graves to his vehicle, the match was impossible to ignore. One by one, the walls around his lies collapsed until he had nowhere left to stand. The betrayal of trust was so deep that even detectives struggled to understand how someone who had worked with Joseph, who had shared meals and conversations, could turn so violently against the entire family. But the evidence was there, cold and unforgiving. A man who had once shaken Joseph's hand had taken everything from him. When the trial began, the courtroom buzzed with a mix of dread and anticipation. Family members sat in heavy silence, holding photographs of Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Jr., as though trying to give them a voice in the room. Prosecutors pieced together a timeline so precise, so painfully detailed, that every person present could feel the weight of the family's final hours pressing down on them. The description of blunt force injuries made the room tremble. The revelation of how the children were found caused several people to break down. It was no longer just a case. It was a wound that had been reopened in front of the world. The defendant sat emotionless as the evidence was read aloud. Witness after witness described the odd behavior he exhibited after the family vanished. The sudden calm, the inconsistent stories, the strange confidence. And when prosecutors showed the jury the photos of the desert graves, the reality hit like a quiet, suffocating blow. This wasn't a disappearance. This was a massacre, carried out with disturbing precision. After weeks of testimony, the jury delivered the verdict. Guilty. Not simply of murder, but of annihilating an entire family for greed disguised as ambition. The courtroom exhaled in one collective release of breath as justice finally found its place, even though justice could never return what was stolen. In the years since the verdict, the McStay family's story has remained one of the most heartbreaking chapters in true crime history. A family who dreamed of a peaceful life near the beach, whose children played with toy trucks and drew pictures on the kitchen table, whose plans for the future were simple and full of love, gone because of one man's monstrous choices. Their home, once filled with laughter, became an echo of what was, and the desert, still silent, remains a graveyard of secrets that can never be fully understood. Yet the memory of the McStay family lives on in the hearts of those who loved them, and in the reminders that justice, even when slow, can still shine through the darkest of tragedies. Their case stands as a warning and a lesson. Sometimes the danger that destroys a family doesn't come from outside, but from someone they trusted too deeply. If you want more stories like this, or the next script in this series, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.